Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Women Serve 2. Today we have Alexandra Mahanna with us. She is a founder of Alexandra Mahanna Leadership and an executive leadership coach known for helping leaders cut through the noise and lead with greater clarity, confidence, and intention. Through a grounded, practical approach shaped by experience across military, corporate, and higher education environments, she helps leaders strengthen decision-making, communicate more effectively, and stay steady under pressure. Her work challenges leaders to stop operating on autopilot and start leading with the kind of clarity others trust. So, Alexandra, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, one of the things that I like to start off with is why you chose the military. Why did you choose the branch that you chose and kind of your military journey?
Okay. Well, my military journey really shaped the entire trajectory of my life, but I don't think it started out the way I ever expected it to. So I joined the Navy after a couple of years of college. And my dad, my grandfather, my uncle, they were all in the Navy. So there was definitely a family connection there. Ironically, my dad actually wanted me to join the Air Force. I assume it was because he thought that I'd have a cushier experience, but I don't know. My heart was set on the Navy. Now, at the time, I was convinced that I wanted to be an aviation mechanic. That was my dream. I wanted to work on helicopters, actually. But I got my ASVAB scores back, and my recruiter told me about an opportunity to become a linguist. And the Navy calls them cryptologic technicians, and 20-year-old me thought that was the coolest thing ever. So, yeah, I said, cool, let's do it. And full transparency there, I had no idea what I was going to be doing. And outside of the language piece, I didn't really know what I was signing up for. Looking back, I feel like I should have asked more questions and I just didn't. My recruiters were also brutally honest there. They also had no idea what crypto analysts did. It was really secretive, and I'm sure it still is today for people who are signing up for that. But let's see, out of every language they could have assigned me, the Navy taught me Spanish and shipped me off to Texas. So I'm okay with that. I thought I wanted to learn Hebrew or I don't know, some exciting language that would get me out in the world. But here I am in Texas. All these years later, I fell in love with it and I stayed. Once I got here, though, I realized that being a linguist wasn't really for me. I wasn't good at it. And that's kind of scary when you're starting a new career and you have always excelled. That's how I was growing up. I always excelled. But being able to pivot from the linguist side of things to doing other things was one of the biggest blessings that I could have ever experienced. The Navy gave me so much. So about 6 years in, I had the opportunity to move to an administrative learning and development role. And that gave me exposure to senior military officers and civilians, people who were creating real impact. So I went from being kind of a grunt to having the ability to enable change. Eventually, I became the training program manager for my organization. And that gave me the opportunity to create impact on a multinational level. I went from just being this random little worker bee linguist to communicating with colonels and even generals. I know I was Navy. I worked with all five branches, though, once Space Force came along. And but little me, E5, talking face to face with a colonel, that was huge and really cool. At some point, I was offered the chance to attend a 2-day workshop, and it was called Lead as Coach. Now, to this day, that grammatically drives me insane. That 2-day course, as a little E5, however many years ago, really changed everything for me because it was my first exposure to effective leadership development and the world of coaching. And I really fell in love with both immediately. Looking back, that was one of those defining moments where you don't really realize the significance at the time, but it completely changes your trajectory. I don't know if you know what I'm trying to get at there, but it's been 7 years. And that moment is part of, actually, it's the reason I do what I do today. So honestly, I feel incredibly blessed by the military career I had. Between the leadership experience and training and certifications and educational opportunities that the military gave me, I'm operating at a level that I just wouldn't be doing without that chapter in my life. I don't think it's that I wouldn't be doing it. I think it's that I couldn't be doing it. Tuition assistance got me through my master's degree before I got out, and that allowed me to preserve my GI Bill and put it all towards a doctorate. So in a few months, I'll be Dr. Alexandra Mahanna, a doctor of education and leadership, which 20-year-old me never thought possible.
Well,
Actually,
congrats. That's huge.
Thank you. I had a conversation through LinkedIn a few days ago, and a new connection referred to me as future Dr. Alexandra, and it kind of hit me how close I am. It's huge, and without the military, it straight up wouldn't be possible.
I love that. So, because of that 2-day event, it kind of led
Mhm.
you to kind of where you are today. So, let's talk about the transition from military to essentially creating your own business and like kind of what that looked like.
Okay. Well, that part of my life is actually a little bittersweet. I had fully intended to do a 20-year career, but I guess that just wasn't the path I was meant to take. In 2023, I medically retired. And to be honest, I didn't think that would ever go through. I knew I was in a med board, but I thought it was just going to get waved off, maybe get surgery for your shoulder, move. And it was terrifying because in July of 2023, I was told I had 7 weeks left of active duty and then I was gone. So it felt like the floor disappeared. Honestly, just thinking about it brings up anxiety because that kind of abrupt identity shift, it was a forced identity shift, really hard to explain unless you've lived it.
And 7 weeks is nothing.
It
Like, that's a
was,
month and a half. Like, that is wild to me.
yeah, my husband and I had just bought a house 5 weeks before. And it was scary because one minute I was in a structured system and I had built a career and I had a future in that system. And then the next I was staring at a timeline that I didn't choose. And I was trying to figure out who I was going to be on the other side of it, and what I was going to wear. I'm sorry, anyone who's gotten out of the military, I didn't know that having to choose my outfit every day would bring me a little bit of stress. It was so much easier just putting on the uniform and going. And I don't know. To this day, I still miss the emotional strength that I felt while wearing the uniform. That strength is still there. And I think what I couldn't fully see at the time was that everything I had built for myself and in myself through my military chapter, it was coming with me. But I was so stressed about that 7 weeks and then out that it was scary. And now
Yeah.
today I'm a 30-something-year-old serving clients as an executive leadership coach. And I'm doing work I really believe in. I help people think clearly and lead effectively. I help them navigate complexity through change with greater confidence, which I'm only able to do because I've gone through that myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the military gives you 7 weeks, and then
Yep.
you're like, okay, now I got to figure something out. What made you decide that leadership and executive coaching was your call?
It actually didn't happen right away. I left the military and I was able to slide into a part-time contracting gig as a social media marketing manager. And then I went into a government contract with the Air Force, actually, at Air Training Command. It was called something else back, the Air Education and Training Command, but it shifted halfway through my contract. And last year, when kind of stuff hit the fan and a bunch of contracts just went out the window, government contracts, I was one of those that didn't get renewed. So it was a complete why in my life. Do I try to get a job in somebody else's organization, or do I jump off the cliff and do something that I've been passionate about for years? I had been coaching part-time since the beginning of 2020, right before COVID. So I had the experience. I knew I loved it. And I don't know, I just got that swift kick in the butt to say, okay, I guess I'll build something and jump into this full time.
Sometimes you just kind of have to believe and bet on your own self. So, what leadership lessons, like from the military, kind of still shape how you lead and coach today?
There are a few. One of the biggest lessons I carried into the work that I do now is that leadership becomes incredibly clear under pressure. When things are moving quickly or things get stressful, our leadership gets exposed really fast, and you find out things like whether communication is actually clear or whether expectations were truly understood, whether trust existed in your environment to begin with. So gaining that experience through the military really shaped how I think about leadership in a lasting way. Because one thing that I saw in the military, and then definitely later on as well in the civilian world, is that pressure doesn't create new leadership behaviors. It's just going to amplify the ones that are already there, for better or for worse. So that idea became why structure became such an important concept for me. So now I think a lot of people, when they hear structure, they immediately think rigidity, but I've found that it's actually the opposite. Good structure is going to create clarity, because when people understand expectations and boundaries, they can perform with more confidence because they have an idea of what to expect. from their leaders. Now, I would say that in addition to that, accountability really shaped me too, but I think it's really evolved over time, because early in my career, I saw accountability as more punitive. It was just traditionally, I'm holding people accountable because they didn't do the right thing. But today, it's much more aligned with consistency. I found that people trust leaders who communicate clearly, who follow through, and who create predictability in how they lead, which ties back to what I was trying to say about structure and how within it people have more confidence because they know what to expect. That confidence, it creates trust. Now, those two things said, I think the thing that carried over most for me is the importance of adaptability. Leadership rarely unfolds in perfect conditions. Just perfect conditions don't exist. We see that in our personal lives, professional lives, everywhere. I would say the leaders who make the greatest impact are not the ones who constantly have perfect answers. They're the ones who are actually staying grounded, and they're adjusting as the situation changes, and they're helping others stay clear when certainty is limited. So that philosophy is actually at the center of how I coach. I quite literally wouldn't be where I am today doing what I do without learning that lesson, because all of the leaders I work with, they're smart and they're capable. So they don't need more leadership philosophy shoved down their throats. They really need a more reliable way to adapt so that they can think clearly and lead consistently when leadership gets complicated.
When leadership gets complicated, because there's going to be pressure, no matter if you're in the military, corporate, or any type of job, essentially. So, how does pressure reveal the leadership strengths and leadership gaps?
Okay. So pressure is incredibly honest. And as a woman in the military, I really experienced this firsthand, because military environments come with really high expectations. There's urgency, there's complexity, constant decision making. And navigating that as a woman really added another layer, because there's often an unspoken pressure to prove your confidence quickly, to remain composed no matter what, and avoid giving anyone a reason to question whether you belong in the room. Now, I'm not saying that being a military woman necessarily made me face greater challenges than any given person. The military challenges every single member in different ways. I'm more saying that kind of environment teaches you very quickly that pressure doesn't care about your intentions. It's always going to reveal your habits. So when things are calm, leaders have the bandwidth to compensate for habits that aren't serving them particularly well. When it's calm and there's nothing getting shoved at them from every direction, they can think. They have more time to recover, and I'd say they have more emotional space to manage how they show up. Pressure changes that when timelines tighten and emotions get heightened. That's when uncertainty starts creeping in and we start second guessing ourselves. And what's already there as leaders, our traits are going to get amplified. So if a leader communicates clearly in their everyday work, that's just going to get amplified under pressure, and they're going to continue communicating clearly. But if they tend to avoid hard conversations, or they are naturally emotionally reactive, that's going to also get amplified under pressure.
So why do so many capable leaders struggle with clarity under pressure?
So I would say that they aren't prepared. Pressure's coming, and you can have all the tools in your tool belt, but if you haven't applied those tools during pressure, you don't know how you're going to react. It's the idea of thinking you're fully prepared until you're not. So when I was talking about how pressure reveals and amplifies the leadership traits that already exist, there's a really big gap there. And actually, this, I would say, is one of the most important leadership realizations I had. And that was understanding that people don't receive our intent. They can only receive how it's communicated. So we can fully intend to do the perfect thing, but if we aren't communicating effectively, our teams they don't care about our intent. They only care how they're taking it, how they're experiencing you. So an example of that would be, if a leader believes they're being decisive, their teams may experience abruptness because their leader is saying, all right, we're going to do this, 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 and this now. Something changed, now do this. And they're not going to explain the why. And as humans, naturally, we're curious. We want to know the why. We want to know what's motivating us to take whatever action it may be. So another thing is that leaders will think they're being flexible, but their team experiences inconsistency because what they're being told to do is constantly changing based on any given whim. So on top of that, I would say more often than not, leaders believe that protecting people from uncertainty is so important, but they actually end up creating a silence which then creates more uncertainty. You can shield me from anything, but if I already have a glimmer that something is there and I don't know what it is, all it's going to do is heighten my anxiety as a team member, right? So all of that, I hope I answered the question right, but all of that really matters because it boils down to trust. And I, as a leader, and when I coach my clients, I also have them do the same thing. We ask, do my people trust me or not? If not, why not? More importantly, if not, how do I fix it? Because that certainly isn't going to happen overnight. Trust is built through experience, not intention, and that takes time. So if leaders stay overly attached to what they meant instead of paying attention to how they're actually being experienced, that's usually where problems show up. But pressure also reveals emotional regulation in a very real way. Teams pay close attention to how leaders respond when things get hard. So if a leader becomes reactive or they're scattered or defensive, unclear, any of those kind of negative emotions, that energy is going to spread quickly. But if a leader is grounded and thoughtful and steady, that energy is going to spread too. So leaders have to choose what energy they're going to relay to their people. And all of that is a really long-winded way of saying, I think pressure is a very revealing leadership environment. It tells you a lot about what's working, what's not, where growth is really needed.
I think you hit everything like so spot on from what I've seen just from previous experiences, because you're right. Some people could have an intention, but it's how you communicate. And I've always said perception is reality. So
Exactly.
if someone's perceiving it this way, that is their reality. So my follow-up question with that was like, so what does intentional leadership look like in practice?
Intentional leadership. That is something that honestly, when I first heard the term intentional leadership, I pictured a leader that was super polished. They were hyper composed and they always knew exactly what to say and what to do. But that's not what it means at all, because the perfect leader doesn't exist, and nor should they. So emotional leadership is much more practical than that. And it looks like pausing long enough to respond instead of react, or recognizing when something feels urgent, emotionally urgent, especially, but being able to pause and take a moment to ask whether it's actually urgent strategically. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions about leadership is that speed automatically equals progress. And in reality, that's not true at all, because even though sometimes fast action is exactly what's needed, a lot of the time what's needed is clarity, so leaders can take tactical action instead of creating generic movement. That wording, some military slipped out there. Anyways, intentional leaders know the difference of intentional movement versus movement just for the sake of movement. I think in practice, that also involves simplifying complexity. A lot of leaders will unintentionally create confusion because they're also trying to process everything at once. And as they're in the middle of communicating that, they're trying to communicate it down to their teams from that overwhelmed state when they haven't figured it out themselves yet. And that kind of circles back to the idea of teams feeling uncertainty or inconsistency because that's what their team leader is showing them. Now, on the other hand, leaders who take the time to create clarity within themselves are going to create stability externally. And I think that matters far more than most leaders realize. Teams are, which I've touched on I guess, several times as I've rambled here. Teams are sensitive to leadership energy, and they may not be able to articulate exactly what feels off, but they absolutely feel it when something is off. That said, they also feel it when something is not off. They also feel it when their leader is trustworthy and grounded, and it helps them feel and participate in whatever's going on in the same way. So when I think about intentional leadership in practice, I think it's all about leaders becoming a source of clarity instead of a source of confusion.
How do you get your clients, like what exercises do you do with your clients to make sure they're more grounded and have more clarity?
There's a few things I do. The first one is super simple, and I've been questioned about it quite a few times, but as soon as clients follow through on it, they go, oh, okay. Whenever a client is in a tough conversation, I tell them to pause for a full 10 seconds, and I have them breathe in for 4 and then out for 6. And I have them use that 10 seconds intentionally to process what's being said and then respond with intention. Now, I have a particular client. She works in the medical field. She was really worried of how she was going to be perceived while she was taking that pause. She was really concerned that the people she was talking to were going to assume that she was either ignoring them or didn't care. And I helped her reframe that. When people see you pause, they don't, I would say for the most part, I'm sure some people do, they don't immediately think negative about your reaction. They see you thinking. We have a thinking face. It's just natural as humans. They see us thinking and they're going to naturally go, okay, so she's thinking about what I said, which means she cares and she's putting effort into her response. And that is a big shift, especially when you get more into the executive leadership realm. Perception is everything. So if an executive leader thinks they're being perceived negatively because they're pausing, we really need to work on reframing that.
So I'm not going to lie. I also think I would probably initially have the same thought as that woman had, because no one likes silence, right? And I feel like 10 seconds is such a long time. Dead silence. But I'm glad that you kind of reframed it the other way. And I also like the whole deep breathing thing, because it's going to calm down your sympathetic nervous system. You're just having a clearer and more calm mind when you're like focusing on that breath work. So I think that is an amazing tip, actually. I love it. So because she was a woman, and you have mentioned how in the military, women tend to have a different experience in leadership, how can women step into leadership roles with greater confidence and authority without losing their authenticity?
I think this is such an important conversation for women to hear. A lot of women have been given some really conflicting messages about leadership. They're told to be confident, but not too confident because you might look arrogant, or be decisive, but stay approachable. Otherwise, people are going to assume you don't care about their opinions. Or my personal favorite, be authentic, but somehow fit whatever leadership mold the environment seems to reward most. That's exhausting. And at some point, a lot of women start performing leadership instead of actually leading. So as a woman shaped by the military, I absolutely experienced a version of that tension. There's so much messaging, both unspoken and spoken, about how you're supposed to show up, how composed you're expected to be, and how quickly you need to prove your competence. And that creates so much internal noise if you're not careful. Now, one of the biggest shifts women can make is realizing that confidence and authenticity aren't competing forces. They're actually meant to be complementary. You don't have to be louder or harder or less yourself to lead effectively. Confidence, in my opinion, has a lot less to do with personality and a lot more to do with self-trust. So trust yourself. Self-trust is built through your experience. It gets built through making decisions and surviving mistakes and holding boundaries and so many different things. But it really comes down to realizing that you're actually more capable than you've probably given yourself credit for. Now, this isn't just applicable to young leaders either. Some seasoned women with decades of experience fall into this habit of not trusting themselves too. I had a really good conversation a couple days with a retired chief warrant officer in the Army. She served 20 something years, and she's jumping into a similar realm that I am, except she's doing the business coaching side versus leadership. And we had a conversation about this exact topic. Now, presence matters here too. Some of the strongest leaders I've worked with are the ones who create real steadiness for the people around them. So they're communicating clearly. They know how to stand their ground without becoming performative about it. So I do want to circle back to authenticity, because I think it gets misunderstood sometimes. Authentic leadership doesn't mean saying whatever you think in the way you feel like saying it. It more means leading in a way that actually aligns with your values, that aligns with your strengths and the kind of leader you want to be. For me, all of that together is what sustainable confidence looks like. It's building self-trust and clarity in a way that your leadership feels aligned with what you're actually doing, so that it's steady and just genuinely your own.
What would you tell someone who is lacking that confidence? Like, what are like a tip you would give them to kind of feel a little bit more confident going into this stuff?
I would say your experience matters. Your knowledge matters. So don't try to compare yourself to others. Think back on what you've already achieved. You've done great things, which means you have the ability to continue doing that.
I love that, because you're right. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize that experience plays such a huge factor in confidence and leadership and just moving forward. So I know we
Exactly.
talked about like leadership with the military, like what leadership skills matter most outside of the military environment.
So, one of the biggest things I learned transitioning out of the military is that while the environment is definitely changing, strong leadership fundamentals absolutely don't. They're exactly the same. What does change is how those skills are going to be applied. So, in the military, there's clear chain of command. In many cases, there's clearer expectations around roles, like more defined scope. You know what your responsibilities and your expectations are based on whatever your billet is, right? Civilian leadership is, I guess, murkier, for lack of a better word. The expectations aren't always clearly communicated, and decision ownership can feel blurry because that chain of command isn't as rigid. I think that also organizational politics can be more nuanced. There's just a lot going on I wouldn't say it feels like high school, but it's definitely a different pace than military environments. And communication styles vary wildly. And that's a thing in the military too, but somehow I would say it's different. I can't really put my finger on how, but it's different in the civilian world. And also, you can have incredibly smart people in the room, and every single one of them will define leadership differently. And that really changes the leadership equation. So, while discipline and accountability and adaptability absolutely still matter, in the civilian world, I think emotional intelligence becomes more important. People don't follow competence alone, they follow leaders that they trust. And we see that in the military too, but again, it's different. What that means is in the civilian world, communication matters tremendously, and not in the obvious sense of just speaking up. It means listening well. It means reading the room and understanding how your leadership is being experienced instead of just assuming that your intent is enough. That's a huge one.
Mm.
And decision making. Decision making matters too because a lot of leaders get stuck waiting for complete information before they move. And in leadership, we rarely get that luxury. We're not going to have all the perfect information. So at some point, leaders have to learn how to make thoughtful decisions with incomplete information instead of freezing or delaying themselves being stuck in analysis.
And one thing that I wanted to definitely talk about was the whole emotional intelligence. So I had to take an executive course for my MBA. And one of the books we had to read was Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And even in my physical therapy program, they also made us read the book. And I think it's such an important book that I almost think everyone should read because I think it could help in, even if you're not in a leadership position, but just being in a like working team. It is such, to me, a very important skill to have.
I love that.
So another book that we also read in my MBA was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I thought that one was really good. But do you have any of your clients read any like particular books or resources, or do you suggest any books and resources that people should kind of dabble in?
I don't typically refer people to other books. 9 times out of 10, I have leaders coming to me with, have you read this book? Have you read that book? Now, I do have a book that I'm actively reading that I am at the point where I would definitely recommend it to people. And it's called Healthy Leadership: How to Thrive in the New World of Work. So it's by Lee Colin and then Julie Davis Colin. It's a husband and wife team out of Dallas. And it has exposed me to some pieces of leadership that I had never thought about. It's very thought-provoking. And so that is a book I would definitely recommend new leaders who they can be working in any environment, already healthy or maybe quite toxic. This book will help you reframe how you walk into the workplace every day.
So, do you give your clients homework to do? Like, walk me through the process for people who are interested in essentially working with what it looks like from getting started to your routinely updates.
Okay, so it starts with a discovery call, and I have that linked on my website. And it's a 30-minute conversation, and I go through something called the SOAR model. And it's just a way of me asking questions that helps me identify what you're really struggling with. Because a lot of the time, leaders will come to me and say, I'm dealing with this problem. And that's not the root of the problem. So we got to dig deeper. So on the discovery call, I give them a taste of what it is to work with me. because I'm genuinely curious. I'm trying to build rapport, and I'm trying to figure out if this relationship is going to be a good fit for both of us, because that matters. So I ask a lot of questions, which is what coaching is all about. I'm trying to unlock what is already, within you. It's just buried under all the noise of every other priority you have in your life. So from there, if we decide it's a good fit, then I send a couple things. I send a coaching agreement, and it details expectations on both sides, both for myself as a coach and them as a client, because coaching is a lot of self-reflection. You need to be ready to be self-aware and see yourself clearly. Sometimes that is the biggest hurdle. It is so hard to acknowledge our faults, and we all have them, myself included. I wouldn't be a coach if I hadn't worked through myself. After that is done, then there's the retainer, and there's a choice. So I do a monthly retainer for my services, and my clients can either have 50 minutes weekly with me, or they can have 80 or 90 minutes bi-weekly. I had to think about that for a second. 50 minutes weekly, 90 minutes bi-weekly. It's the same price. Different leaders need different amounts of accountability. So if you want to meet weekly, I will 100% be your accountability partner. I will be there for you. I will cheer you on. I will help you work through your weekly problems. And 90 minutes bi-weekly really comes down to people who want to apply what we've worked on in their session for a bit longer of amount of time before coming back. And that's where a lot of deeper conversation comes in, because we have an hour and a half together. It's a long time, and it makes for great conversation. And then with that, there's also a choice, a time commitment choice. So my clients 9 times out of 10 start with a 3-month commitment, and then they keep working with me, extend from there. My monthly price doesn't change whether you want to work with me for 3 months or 12 months. It's always going to be the same. I'm providing the same value. No matter how long up front, I know we're going to work together. That said, so far, all my clients have stuck with me. I've been full-time since September. So I must be doing something right, and I love what I'm doing. And I would like to say that my clients are feeling the benefit of the transformations that they're experiencing.
So for those who are interested in your services, what are some of the topics that you focus on or that you offer to focus on?
So when I started, I said I was going to focus on these things, and I found each client is different. Each person is so unique that will touch on some of the same things I might work with other clients on, but it's always different. Now, some of the biggest things I like focusing on are leading through uncertainty. So how to make decisions under pressure, how to lead under pressure. I also enjoy working on emotional intelligence. So with leaders who maybe struggle with connecting with their teams because that sense of vulnerability, it just doesn't come naturally to them. And then I would also say on top of that, in almost every single client, there's some sort of team management aspect or building strong teams and knowing when to let people go. And I'm not saying firing people. I'm saying when somebody is not a great fit for a team, how to navigate that difficult conversation and shift those individual roles on that team.
I know you're an executive leadership coach, but does your client have to be in an executive position, or can someone just want to better themselves in leadership?
They do not have to be in an executive position at all. I have mid-level leaders right through senior leaders. I have a small business owner who doesn't even have a team. She's managing client relationships. So I work with, as long as a leader is experiencing some sort of overwhelm and they're ready to look at themselves and move past that, then they're a good fit.
And I know you mentioned the small business owner. And one of the questions I actually did have for you was, what advice would you give women transitioning from the military service into leadership and entrepreneurship?
Stop underestimating what your experience actually taught you. I see this all the time, especially with women veterans. Somehow incredibly capable women who have led under pressure and they've solved problems and all this stuff. They still downplay their experience when they step into civilian leadership or entrepreneurship. And I understand it because I lived it too. In the civilian world, the environment changes. Absolutely. The language changes. The structure changes. The expectations can look different, but that doesn't mean that your leadership capability suddenly disappeared. One of the biggest transitions in my experience is learning how to translate your experience instead of minimizing it. So don't minimize it. Military language doesn't map cleanly into the civilian world, but Your leadership traits absolutely carry over. Pressure management translates, decision-making translates, adaptability, resilience, accountability, it all translates. So what needs to evolve is your ability to communicate those strengths. That was a huge lesson for me. And in entrepreneurship specifically, I believe it requires a different kind of self-leadership, because in military environments, there's always structure. There's still hierarchy. Entrepreneurship is wildly different from that, because you're suddenly the strategist, the decision maker, the marketer, the IT guy, the finance guy. And somehow you're also the one who's probably talking yourself off the ledge at 11 p.m., overthinking something that probably wasn't on fire in the first place. So talk about wearing a dozen hats. That's just a very different experience than stepping into leadership within someone else's organization.
I do think like people don't realize how much more you actually do take on to like start a small business. Because the idea obviously sounds great, right? Like working for yourself and blooming this idea that you have, but there is like a lot of hats that you are going to wear. And I do think like leadership and pressure, clarity, and all that other stuff translates huge into the small business owners as well. So how can people find you? If they wanted to work with you, ask you questions, connect with you.
I am on social media. I'm brand new to it, but I'm getting better every day. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, all as Alexandra Mahanna Leadership. And I also have my website, alexandramahannaleadership.com. It's very long, but it's the only Alexandra Mahanna you'll find. So that's exciting. Yeah. And I'd love, reach out, DM me, or book a discovery call. I'd love to have a conversation. Those discovery calls are non-committal. Just show up and we'll have a conversation. And I love doing that.
And I will add all of those in the show notes. So because the discovery calls aren't committal and they are just a good 30-minute conversation, definitely take advantage of that. So as we're wrapping up, what advice would you give someone, or what do you hope someone takes away from this episode?
I hope they take away that I'm emphasizing not to shrink your story. Your leadership matters. Your perspective matters. Your experience matters. So your goal moving forward, transitioning out of the military or transitioning out of whatever environment you're in, should never be to leave any of that behind. So carry it forward intentionally and trust yourself, because you're bringing far more into your next chapter than you probably realize.